Donc bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez dans le casque? Canal 1 pour le français, canal 2 pour l'anglais, 2 in English. Pour suivre la conférence, il vous faut un casque et un transmetteur. Bien, je vais commencer comme ça.
I'm going to start speaking now. Hopefully you're all connected to the right channels. So off we go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. There are many of you in the room. That's really good to see. We are celebrating the kick-off of wind turbines in the sea here in France. We had the first wind farms that have been approved, and they're continuing to be in the future. And we also have some floating wind farms, and they're starting to be seen off our coastline. And I think it's great to see that becoming a reality. So to take a look at what's going on in the political landscape, I'm going to hand the floor to Didier CORDORNIOU. Thank you. Let me just tell you who Mr. CORDORNIOU is, if you don't know who he is. He is the first Vice President of the Occitanie region, and he, in his portfolio, is the Mediterranean. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a bit strange for me to be here talking to all of you with your headsets on, but I hope that you can all hear me, whether it's in French or in English. I can see some people giving me a thumbs up, so that's good. So first of all, I would like to say that Carole Degas, the president, cannot be with us, and she sends her apologies, or he has asked me, and Christophe Menas, president of the Mediterranean Commission, who is my colleague and friend. They have asked me to talk to you a little bit about our strategy and the road we have travelled over these past 5 years. As you know, we needed a port that was big enough to accommodate huge infrastructures. And so the Port de Bonne-Nouvelle is the perfect one, and it corresponds to our ambitions. The President of France, Mr. Macron, a few days ago came down here to confirm that 45 gigawatt target for 2050. And the public debate is starting now. There's going to be a public debate with, there's going to be a road trip calling in Occitania in 2024. There are going to be a couple of stopovers in Occitania on that road trip, and I would like to reconfirm to you here our commitment to creating this sea wind farm industry, and we've been working on it since 2016. So back in 2016, I remember that this Port-la-Nouvelle port, which was the first place where we saw floating wind turbines, and there we launched a huge challenge, in fact, for the industry. And we also committed huge amounts of energy to coordinate the different wind projects. So I have to reveal to you that we spent a whole lot of time with all of the different people involved, the developers, technicians, the local authorities, the state, the territorial banks, to end up at this stage where we are now. There was the phase where we implemented the projects, which was quite difficult, and then we had to fine-tune things, and we were in doubt a little bit, but at the end of the day we gained in confidence, because I can say that I would like to say that our approach is very positive. It's been very complex in terms of structures and infrastructure, but we are very positive about it. So for the past 10 years, our ambition has been to develop wind turbines out at sea, floating on the sea, and we have all been on board to develop an industry that is, with its infrastructure. We've got support for everything. We've got the Holnet and the Golfe du Lion wind farms. They're supporting us, and we all together wanted to rise to this challenge. And of course, we've got the Parliament of the Sea, which is also backing us. There are a few members of that Parliament here. Jean-Pierre is with us here, and I'm sure there are more of you dotted around the room from the Parliament of the Sea. You've been working with us on the planning, on the schedule, for everything that's at stake for the industry. When we talk about what's at stake for the industry. We're talking about economics, of course, ecology as well, but also we have to think about the fishers, the professional fishermen, so that the fishermen can be brought to the table and they can co-construct and adapt this huge project for the Mediterranean Sea. So there are high expectations throughout the region. There have been some commitments already made, and we know that we will have concrete results in future years. And I would like to commend the different clusters and the different groups in the industry for promoting local content. So convinced of the need to have necessary infrastructures in ports for sea-based wind turbines, we have drawn up a plan for regional ports and floating wind turbines, and we have a main port and 7 backup ports. So I would like to thank Philippe, who's the president, and the director, Olivier Carmes, who are with us in the room here. I'd like to thank them for working with us on these challenges. The Mediterranean coast is being organized now. We've got structures. We've got our 2 parliaments, the South PACA and the Parliament of the Sea. And we're working on knowledge about these projects and telling the general public about them and getting the general public to accept them. So we've got this Parliament of the Sea, and my friend Christophe, I haven't seen him yet, but I'm sure he's here. But we are working hand in hand, as we are with Renaud Muselier and Carole Delga, working together for these projects because there's so much at stake. In the 18th of January next year, there is going to be, at the Parliament of the Sea, there are going to be meetings bringing everyone together to talk about access to the sea, to access to information and the public debate. The public debate is going to be very, very important, as all debates are, but this one particularly so because the economic stakes are rather high, and we have to get this right. So we want our ports to be coordinated. We've got Port La Nouvelle, we've got the big maritime port in Marseille, and the general manager is here, and also the port of Sète is involved. And I'm really delighted to welcome the general manager of Sète Port. We've got Jan Vicker, who represents Port La Nouvelle. And I've been working with these people regularly. I spend a lot of time with them to make sure that all of these targets are met. Philippe Malagola, president of the port, who I'd like to commend once again, Olivier Cam, the general manager. Very quickly, the region got involved in financing the infrastructures. Infrastructure is very, very important. And at Port La Nouvelle, it's the 250 million euros. It's a long, long story that was kicked off by 2 regional presidents. The first, Georges Frêche, who wanted to turn this Port Nouvelle and Sète into a strategic port for the Mediterranean in between Barcelona and Marseille. And this port, which took some time to get off the ground, but Carole Delga recognized the potential and the opportunities there with the energy transition and could make Port La Nouvelle the leading wind farm port in the Mediterranean. And that's really important because when we built the CEMOP model with private partners, we were working with private partners in a public-private partnership, and that meant that we could raise 500 million euros, which have been will be invested between now and 2028. On this final point, I just want to mention the state, and I would like to commend the representatives of the state who are with us today and the PACA region, because they really are all on board with this, shoring up the French president's ambitions. He mentioned this, he was in Toulouse a couple of days ago, to industrialize the Mediterranean basin and coordination with Mediterranean countries who are committed to wind turbines. The stakes are very, very high. We know that we've got our Spanish, our Italian colleagues, and we need to realize how we can work together on wind farms to create a hub and on the energy transition with a a very ambitious setup, and we'll go back to that later on. It's important to start that work right from today, and we're ready to do that. So we are already engaged in in work with European ports. All of this organisation and all the lobbying needs to be set up. But with all of the forces that are in place, they're ready just to roll up their sleeves and get down to it. And beyond that challenge, there's employment and training. This is a responsibility which we all share, local authorities, state, different industries, and we must all carry this burden together and to be coordinated. We can see this in labour. The first floaters that have been created with a group called Matthieu, a company called Matthieu, we have noted this, that labour with new trades, some old trades have disappeared, then new trades coming back. I'm thinking about the boiler workers and the welders. They would have high salaries up to 3,500, even more than that. I think with our partners, we have to work on these different subjects. So we conclude that it's a very complex issue. The infrastructures are gigantic, between 3,000 and 8,000 tons for your flotters, and then by 2024 there's going to be another phase coming through at Foss, the coast at Foss, and so we really need everyone to be committed, and we need to anticipate what's going to happen. And we will be able to anticipate if we have qualified labour on hand. So here's a second message for you. So after this initial message to the state, here's a second message to all developers and local authorities, those who are involved in employment and training. Let's intensify whatever we've already started to do. Let's adapt our systems to the industry's needs, and let's commit more resources, and let's all develop expertise and know-how and make wind turbines in the sea an attractive industry. So let's get back to what I was saying at the outset. The two presidents announced that this was going to be their ambition, that floating wind turbines would be out there, and we've got such a lot of expertise which already exists, and we had to really go one step further. So we're having research into this industry, and that's all operational, and we now have to apply research, because that's one of the pillars of how we'll be able to develop wind energy. So let me talk about national structures now in research and a collaborative approach in Europe. Those are very, very essential given the challenges, and I'm delighted to see France Énergie Marine, Open Sea, Eric Catalogne, and a company from the Netherlands, and we've also got the Med Center in Norway. And thanks to their work and all of their commitment, they have been demonstrating our commitment to work together. So as you have understood, the challenges are wonderful. They're going to be hard, but we really do need to have positive energy to drive our region. At the head of the region, we've got the president of the region, and then we've got you. And altogether, we have to be able to very quickly construct all of these structures and generate jobs. And behind those jobs, we'll be able to move towards that energy transition to have a neutral carbon footprint. So this is a subject which is really dear to my heart. Hydrogen. As you know, there are some very ambitious targets in our region and also in the state announced by France's president. And Airbus industry has started to fly the first green aircraft in 2030, I think the deadline is now, rather than 2035. And that will be powered by hydrogen. We need to be able to store hydrogen. And as far as our different territories are concerned, we're going to have to develop a different risk culture and perhaps tackle these subjects which we're not very familiar with, so that we can face the future with strength, serenity, and ambition. So those are the few words which I wanted to share with you before launching this roundtable on wind farms and wind turbines. So I'm delighted to share this roundtable with you, and I'm looking forward to listen to what all of the different speakers have to say. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cordorniou. I've got some information to share while we're organising the stage up here. If you are standing, please realise that you can pick up one of the remaining seats, but you can listen to these conferences on your smartphone. You just need to download the EnerGaïa app. So wherever you are in this trade show, you can listen to the conference. So go and make yourself comfortable. If there's an empty chair somewhere away from this room, don't worry. If you download the app, you can use your own personal headset and listen to the conference. So this conference, there's going to be another conference. At 4:30 there's going to be the Parliament of the Sea, which is having its meeting, and it's going to be talking about different marine energies apart from floating wind turbines. That's at 4:30 in this same room, the Parliament of the Sea, and you're very welcome to come to that. Then tomorrow there's going to be France Énergie Marine, which is the research industry, and they're going to be holding a conference at 2 p.m. in the exhibition hall. So now I'm going to invite my first three panel members to come up onto the stage: Matthieu, Laurent, Etienne Serre, and Matthieu Monnier. I'd like them to come up to the stage, then I'll be able to introduce them to you. Let's all gather together at the center of the stage. I'll stay to one side of the stage so I can see you all. You've got your headsets on, that's good to see. Hang on a minute, I can't do everything all at once. Let me just put my mic down for a second. Okay, we've got far too many things to hold. It's a bit difficult juggling with them all. So here we are to talk about planning wind energy out at sea by 2050 in France and in the Mediterranean in general. We're going to talk about France first and then the Mediterranean. And I have three guests here. I've got Mr. Matthieu Laurent, who is head of offshore wind turbine projects at the Energy and Climate Department at France's Energy Transition Ministry. We've got Etienne Serre, who is National Coordinator for Public Debate on the coast for the Electricity Board, and Matthieu Monnier, who is co-general manager of France Renouvelable. So he is representing the industry, the wind turbine industry, amongst others, but each person can say a little bit more about themselves, because I think recently your company has changed name. I'm sure you'll be telling us all about that. So my first question is for you, Matthieu Laurent. So we've got public debate, which was kicked off a few days ago. So this public debate is not only about wind turbines out at sea, its scope is broader. So can you tell us what its scope is? And it will end on the 26th of April. What will be the role of this debate? And what will the different phases be during this debate? Well, thank you very much, everybody, for inviting me to participate in this round table and to represent the Energy and Climate Division for the Ministry of Energy Transition. So this is a public debate which is not only about wind turbines. We want to talk about how we use the sea in general, with a zoom in on protecting biodiversity in the sea. And this debate is a federation of different combats. We want to update the energy programme, and we want to work on the document for the coastline, and that's why it's a good idea to have this integrated. Can you just tell us what this document is all about? Yes, it's a document for the coastline, the Mediterranean coastline, and it will decide how the sea is used, how we will protect the sea when we use the sea. So these two different tools are to be updated and drawn up in a new style, and we want this debate to cover all questions pertaining to the sea. It's been within our remit for a long time. It's above and beyond the questions of wind turbines in the sea. It really is a broader scale public debate. So all of the uses that the sea is put to, the marine biodiversity will occupy a special role with a lot of protection zones which have been introduced into our marine areas, areas where usages are regulated or even banned. And the final most important point is developing wind turbines out at sea. We have ambitious plans that have been sketched out by the French president, and the targets are very high. So our debate wants to showcase all of the different participants so that we can have this 18 gigawatt wind turbine energy out in sea by 2035 with 45 gigawatts or gigawatts by 2050. And so the public debate will come to an end in April, and there will be different sequences, different phases to this debate. There will be some longer weeks, which will cover several weeks. There will be a lot of events in Marseille starting next week, and this week even, in Narbonne. And then we're going to do some more in January. And it's going to take there will be different formats depending on how we organize our public debate. There will be mapping meetings so that we can all think together about where wind turbines should be located.
After this public debate, we will know where the 45 gigawatts of wind farms will be located and what type of farm it will be. We have moving objectives. We have 40 gigawatts, now 45. It seems to be increasing, ever increasing. Well, we will not know till the end of the public debate where we will locate those 45 gigawatts. And this public debate is also based on the APER law that enables us to have this public debate on wind farms at sea, and it is established that by 2024 we will have to set up two mappings. One of the projects that will have to be allotted in the next 10 years after the public debate. So it's called mapping number 1, and then mapping number 2 gives us more visibility and focuses on projects that will be attributed by 2050. For both types of projects, there will be calls for bidding, and areas will be rediscussed in 10 years' time, taking into account potential new constraints or changes. Now, regarding changing objectives, yes, there seem to be ever increasing. A year ago, I mentioned 40 gigawatts. That's true. But we base ourselves on the latest simulations that we run up until 2050, and it shows that this energy will not be developed enough if we don't change our figures. So we have added 5 gigawatts in order to meet that challenge, with the objective of replacing fossil fuel energies via an accelerated development of new energies. So you are talking about the energy mix. Why 45 and not 59? We saw the figures of 59 with some projections by RTE. Yes, the 59 figure, I'm not quite sure. I don't have the RTE figures in mind, but before that public debate, the state requested from the prefects work on wind farms planning in order to identify potential areas and potential targets and figures. And that figure of 59 was mentioned. It was the ambition of the state to identify areas where we could produce 50 to 59 gigawatts by 2050. Okay, so mapping is great, but how do you actually get there? I think you have a PowerPoint for us, if I can display it on the screen. So, what is the planning in order to meet this challenge? 18 gigawatt by 2035, but we only have 15 gigawatts almost ready. 3.6 in 2030. And then how do you get from 3.6 to 18 in 5 years' time? Well, I think that when we are announcing such figures, we contribute to preparing the industry, and we encourage people to mobilize and create the jobs that we will need, the welding and everything that's been mentioned already. I have a technical issue. I'll be right back. We tried to anticipate. Our planning is very tight, as you know, and since the E5 law, the state is managing wind farms for the first few years, and the state is in charge of all technical studies, de-risking studies, and the first few steps and the environmental campaigns that will have characterized biodiversity on site, so that the winners can have their impact study on marine biodiversity. So, in some cases, we have been able to anticipate and send ships in order to characterize the areas involved, and we have actually received some geological reviews last year. We have to plan and organize for the rotation of ships. As you know, everyone wants to be very active in that area, so it's difficult to have ships at the right time. We have to comply with many technical issues, taking into account sunshine, waves, currents. We will have we have candidates. We will have a winner soon, so as to deploy buoys on the areas. We are in the process of preparing the calls for bidding, and when we have the appropriate zoning, we will be able to deploy our systems in those areas. It will be quite difficult to attribute 8 to 10 gigawatts in one single call for biddings. So we will have to practice with AO6, which involves 2 projects, and by the end of next year we will have another call for bidding with an extension of AO6, AO5 and AO7, 5 and 7 in LAURENT. And in more than a year time now, we will have a great call for bidding for 8 to 10 gigawatts, where we will have similar challenges. So all the work that we do for AO6 and that will be deployed for its extensions will be quite useful for the allotment of these 10 gigawatts. All right, I have been dealing with that technical problem. So did you work with the calls for building for AO5 in Brittany and AO7 and 8? When will we know the winners? For AO5, it's only a few weeks to wait now, because it will be by the end of February or beginning of March that we will have a name. For AO6, AO6 is for 2 floating wind farms in the Mediterranean. Yes, and we will have names by the end of the summer or beginning of autumn. And in autumn 2025 for AO7 and AO8. Regarding the 18 gigawatts that you mentioned, when you see the graph, you realize that 10.4 gigawatts have already been identified. The project is on its tracks. We have just 7.6 gigawatts to reach so as to meet our target by 2030. Mr. Serre, for RTE, what's your part in the public debate that was launched in November? Well, we are kind of lagging behind in this debate because connecting to the grid is not major so far. And our objective so far in this debate is to bring on the table questions regarding connection and to identify future connecting areas, whether they be terrestrial or maritime. We need to launch projects after the minister's decision, after the public debate. And you will not be able to have your cables in place in a couple of days. So what will be your calendar, your schedule? Well, after the public debate, we will start working on the projects, which means that we'll have to launch regulatory procedures, environmental studies, so as to present and to apply for the authorizations. It will take some time. It's a long-term process in terms of paperwork as well as in terms of technical work. Secondly, it is a real industrial challenge, and we will need to have the appropriate materials on time so as to meet our deadlines. Do you have an example? No, we have not ordered anything yet because the projects are non-existent so far, but we are looking at our neighbors and we realize that all other network managers have bidding so as to book for material and production time with producers, manufacturers. Just a few figures. One of our colleagues, Tenet, manages maritime networks in the Netherlands. They have bought 40 billion worth of material, 30 million worth of marine equipment, and 10 billion worth of cables. National Grid, our British counterpart, has launched a call for biddings for 60 billion pounds. So we also need to standardize our purchases, massify them, and book production slots with industries. Because by the time we are going to be ready to buy some materials, people are going to say to us, we are not able to provide anything. Matthieu, what's your point of view on this project, this 45 gigawatt project? Is it in line with the expectations of your industry? Good afternoon. I've worked with Didier and Christophe, who are very much involved on this issue in the Mediterranean. You mentioned ever-increasing figures. It's not a pure coincidence. After publishing the objectives of RTE by 2050, we targeted 50 gigawatts by 2050 because we knew that in terms of energy production, wind farms can supply as much as 50 gigawatts. And after Belfort, the French president mentioned 45 gigawatts. It's only 5 more gigawatts to reach 50. We think it would be consistent. Those figures are good news, and these gigawatts are going to spread all along our coast. It's not going to be one coast more than another. Of course, everyone has the Atlantic in mind. If we have less wind farms in the Mediterranean and in the English Channel, we'll have more wind farms in the Atlantic, but there's no reason why there should be less wind farms in some areas. According to our studies, we could develop wind farms in the Mediterranean. In the Council for Coastlines, it was established that given the expectations in terms of energy and the gigafactories around Fos-sur-Mer, we would have to raise our targets as compared to what had been determined by the minister previously. We think that the Mediterranean has a strong potential for 2030 or 2040. We could reach 8 gigawatts by 2050 in the Mediterranean. It's not about filling in all the areas, but it's just about finding the right balance between energy densification, that's to say the number of megawatts by square kilometer, as well as coexisting with other activities, including fishermen. And there are many types of fishing activities in the Mediterranean. It's not just one type. Also have urban constraints with quotas, contingencies, and we have to take into account the protection of the environment. When we develop projects, they are going to receive authorizations only if their impact is being offset. So having all this in mind, we could reach 8 gigawatts by 2050. We have a first planning cycle in the Mediterranean, which is a very precise document that identifies micro areas. And we have defined 4 macro areas, avoiding the coastline, avoiding sensitive species, taking into account tourism, yachting, maritime traffic. So we don't want to infringe on anyone else's activities, including fishing, of course. But resources are ever changing in the sea, so it's difficult to have a clear-cut planning. Hence, as Matthieu and Laurent said, the necessity to launch further studies. The Occitanie region had already launched some studies. All of this aims at enriching the amount of knowledge so as to be ever more precise. And we're very happy to have that public debate because it will be a chance for us after the first part of our work to publish our cartography of the 50 gigawatts. And it will include a map of the Mediterranean stating precisely where we could have those 8, 7, 8 or 9 gigawatts. So the state aims at 9 gigawatts in the Mediterranean or less. At present, the state aims for a target of between 4 to 7.5 gigawatts by 2050, taking into account all the constraints because the Gulf of Lion is quite small in size. Of course, we have to discuss with all the actors and stakeholders, fishermen, with the local authorities, with the tourism industry to see if we can do better than that. Perhaps we can. But we'll have to reach some conclusions so as to take the appropriate decisions on volumes and localization. So these will be floating wind farms. Can you envisage other activities within those parks, like aquaculture or fishing? Some types of activities will be possible within those farms. It will have to be established by maritime prefects. Apparently, fishing will not be a problem in a floating wind farm. It will be more of a challenge for some types of fishing that request some anchorings 1 kilometer away from a floater. So some work will have to be done on this. Regarding aquaculture, we have not heard any interest in developing some aquaculture in wind farms that would be located some 30 kilometers away from the coast. So, but if people are interested, we are open-minded. But it seems there is no need and no expectation from the aquaculture industry. Well, we will be consistent in terms of co-activity. If we receive some requests, we will study them and include them in the design of the projects, taking into account all the specifications. But maritime safety will be a prerequisite. But as long as safety is ensured, we can develop co-activities. We are working on jointly developing aquaculture and wind farms, so we will wait for the conclusions of that study. Regarding the objective of 8 or 9 gigawatts, as Matthieu said recently on future consumption centers, having in mind a priority in Fos, Le Havre and Cordemais, so the future bigger centers, which include Fos, those centers will need extra capacity, electrical capacity, power capacity. We will have terrestrial renewables or offshore windmills, wind farms. I think it would be safer to bet on the technologies that are already existing. Etienne, is our coastline network sufficient for this? So far it was the end of line, but Matthieu Monet is now talking about 9 gigawatts. I don't know if it's a realistic figure, but what will this mean for the coastline? So far we had to connect 250 megawatts on the grid, and it was very close to the coastlines. But now, given the connection solutions that have been mentioned, we will need a 400,000 volt network. We have such a network near the coastline, near Perpignan, near Lézignan, in the Aude region, or in Hérault. We have an area in Tamaro. And we also have a 400,000 volt network near Fos, and we have projects to reinforce the power supply in Fos for decarbonation purposes for the industry. These projects will allow us to connect offshore floating farms. We know that in the Fos area, we will have the capacity to evacuate all the power supply on other areas so as to proceed to the connection. Some studies are ongoing for this. We are basing ourselves on various hypotheses, taking into account constraints and strengthening solutions. Are you implying that we'll have to build onshore lines? Yes, we will have to reinforce the network. There are many possibilities, but building 400,000 volt lines is not excluded. What do you think in terms of acceptability? Is this acceptable? Well, these are no easy projects. This is why we try to focus on connections in places where infrastructure. The infrastructure is ready. It's possible in the area of Le Havre, Fos, and so on. In other areas, we would need some more time to pursue the connection. One more question. Having plans, that's great, but you have to set up an entire industry. Emmanuel Macron declared in Nantes on the 20th of November, I want us to be one of the leaders in floating wind farms, and we are going to dedicate 200,000 euro. It's a small project regarding to green hydrogen, but how do you mount an entire industry with that small amount? I would like to be more specific on what the President said. For those who were present in Pour la Nouvelle with Jean Castex 2 years ago, 300 million euros were announced for the development of industries and harbors for floating wind farms. So this extra 200 million euro comes in addition to the previous project. There is a launch for projects for the industry, which is open. It's open since a year and a half in order to fund such projects. Besides, we have created a system of tax credit system, as the Americans did. So is it a tax credit for green industries? That's right. So if you take into account all these lines, all these budgets, you go way beyond these 200 million euro, and we are approaching the 500 million or so. It's quite difficult to know exactly, but the 200 million euros were mainly for the ports. It remains very little as compared to hydrogen. Yes, it's on the basis of the studies that we had, and for the type of projects, the state usually funds up to 30%, so all the rest has to be funded by local authorities. Our regions have put a lot of funding on the table, and we have many other ports. We have to establish mechanisms with the ports, including Marseille-Fos. But it's great news, though. There's 200 million euros. It was not guaranteed, and it's great. I'm turning to our next speakers. They will answer directly. Yes, we would like to commend the French president for the government's involvement, and the development of green energy is a great thing. It echoes investment plans that have been developed in the US and in China. For those who work on port infrastructure, they may find that such announcements are very positive, but usually their needs go way beyond the budgets that are allotted. When you come to realize that projects are more significant and they need extra funding, the government can then re-examine its funding. We think it's the way it's going to take place, and we will be able to focus on the ports' expectations as soon as there will be some planification and a harmonization in the planification. You don't need to invest high amounts on all ports. You have to distribute activities between Fos, Pour la Nouvelle, and Sète, for instance, for the Mediterranean, so as to share resources. There will be some private funding as well, with the CEMOP in Port-la-Nouvelle, for instance. And there will be European fundings as well, because if we want to reach industrial sovereignty in Europe, Europe has to get involved. So it's a very high ambition, which we comment, and we will see what comes out of the calls for biddings. We'll take 2 questions from the public, and then we will turn to our next speakers. Have you got any question in the public?
Non.
No. Okay, well, I shall release you, gentlemen, because we've got a very, very busy schedule to get through, not to mention the Parliament of the Sea, which is coming into this room later on. Thank you very much to you. Now I would like Mr. Vickers and Mr. Martel to come up to the stage, please, and I will move centre stage and try and make sure that I don't trample on all of the wires and detectors and other bits of IT up here. So here we are talking about ports. So Hervé Martel is the president of the management board of the Maritime Port of Marseille, and he's here with Jan Vickers, who is the general manager of Port-la-Nouvelle. So perhaps you'd like to come back on what you heard the president say. Are you confident in the fact that this is just kind of the kick-off figure and that things will firm up later on? Well, let's wait and see. I've got a little bit of experience on the wind turbines, because we have some industries in our port, and that has been very successful. For Le Havre, Cherbourg, Saint-Nazaire, and industry in France is playing the game and holding up rather well on a European scale. So the new bit is the floaters for those floating wind turbines rather than those that are placed offshore. We need to find an industry, and we've got this 200 million euros, which have been announced by the French government for this industry. That's good news, of course. The second piece of good news would be the local authorities participating, and the third piece is visibility on the markets, because I know that as soon as this industry becomes visible, then the private sector will chime in. Which market are you talking about? We're talking about the ports and stuff, and this, we're not only talking about a French market here either. Our ports are always looking all around Italy and Spain with some ambitious projects. Jan and I have received requests from industrialists who are working in Italy and who are asking for quotes from French ports, because they know that what we're working on is of interest to them for the deployment of their technologies from France. So we see that this means jobs in France and jobs all around the Mediterranean basin. And I think we are strategically placed in France, and so we really ought to, take stock of this. Yes, Jan Vickers, what would you like to say? Yes, I echo completely what Hervé's just said. I am perfectly in agreement with him. And I think this government announcement recognises the role ports have to play in floating wind turbines. That wasn't a foregone conclusion when I took this job a few years ago. Not everybody realised this. We weren't talking about floating wind turbines back in that day. We talked about ports as storage areas whilst things were going on in the sea, whereas with the floaters, then the ports really have to be in the very centre of the setup, and the government is recognising that, and it is a really important step forward. As for the budget now, we hope that the budget will swell. What with CEMAP and the region investing, we've got 300 million. We've already identified 200 million further euros to help us. And Matthieu was talking about 9 gigas. We were thinking about 12 gigas, weren't we saying at lunchtime, Hervé? But what we are saying is that between our 2 ports, we can support the deployment of 1 giga by year on the Mediterranean. So we really do encourage the state to just get out there and do it. There is a bit of a difference between you. You don't have the same status. Could you perhaps remind us what the differences are between your 2 different entities? I'm a decentralized port. I belong to my region. And in 2021, we had a 40-year concession contract, which is a CEMAP. with the region, and we have public-private government of that. So the public has 49%, with the region has 34% of that, and the Caisse des Dépôts has 15%. And on the other hand, we've got a private consortium called Nouvella, and there we have Belgian groups and PMV, for example, and CARE and the CCI, who have 51% of the shares. So there's going to be a... I think you ought to slow your pace of speed round, because we have our interpreters with us. The interpreters are really suffering today. You're putting them through their paces with all of these figures and names and things. So apologies to the interpreters. Yes, we can always use a lot more jargon just to make life even more difficult for the interpreters. But as for the Marseille-Fos port, we belong to the state. We have shared governance between the state, the region, and department, and the city of Marseille. And we have board members come from the private sector as well. The advantage for us is that our port already existed. It's been around for several thousand years, in fact. But it's on 10,000 hectares. We've got a lot of infrastructures, and that means that we have been able to get ourselves organized to welcome this pilot project without too much of a fuss. We haven't yet started to invest in new infrastructures, unlike Port La Nouvelle, because just that's the way it is. So Port La Nouvelle does have infrastructure. Is it all ready now? Well, it's still being built. We've got the first phase, which was organized by the region, and that is currently in operation now. It's a terminal, and that's where we have the pilot wind farms working, 250 meters of quayside, and we are also building an extension to this terminal, which is reserved for renewable marine energies, with the new surface areas of land which will be built out on reclaimed land from the sea. And so the work is underway, and but the terminals are there. We've got another multi-bulk terminal, and the civil engineering of the quayside has already started, and we're also developing 70 hectares of logistics parks as well, and that will all become operational on the 1st of January 2026. So that's quite soon then. Mr. Martel, you've also got plans. Can we see the slides of Mr. Martel up on the screen, please? You have built Provence Grand Large. You've got floaters there for the pilot project, which is launched from Marseille. But you also have other plans for floating wind turbines. Yeah, we've got it's the consortium that built those 3 floating wind turbines that are off the coast of Fos, and they will very soon be producing electricity. The Minister of Energy Transition was on site last week. To simplify things, I would say that we had FH Metal already located in Fos, 15 hectares or so, and they were producing and integrating the 3 floaters. Can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear you, but just the volume went down for a little bit. It's back to where it was now. So they had already built the 3 floaters for this pilot scheme, and they're going to be building more for Port La Nouvelle, for the NG group, and potentially we're also going to be extending, so it'll be 30 hectares at that's the yellow part on the map there, and we work with FH Metal, which will be able to build and integrate metallic floaters irrespective of the patent and the industrial characteristics. So we've managed to cobble together, well, we've smelted the floaters, we've stored them, and we've extended our buildings, and we've taken space of the serial depots and everything. And so we've got these 3 pilots. We're not yet functioning on an industrial scale. We have the gentleman who spoke first of all this afternoon, he took the decision, working with the orange blocks on the map there, building 1,000 meters of quay and a whole load of land to have a crane that will unload things from French factories to be able to store those elements and to integrate the wind turbines on that site. The second subject is to structure a site for manufacturing concrete floaters, because all of the industrialists are saying that technologies are not yet sufficiently stabilized, and although there are advantages with steel, concrete has other advantages, and the concrete industry could be a very, very good way of giving a backbone to this floating industry. So that is something quite substantial. The third component, and this is what you can see in green on my map on the screen there, this is a body of water. I can't hear myself. I'm going to take my headset off because it's feeling rather uncomfortable here. This is where we'll be able to store 20 or so concrete floaters. They're kind of squares, 100, 120 meters in length, so these are big pieces of concrete. And as you can see on the map, we have a natural body of water that is there naturally, and we can use that to do our commissioning of these wind turbines once they have been put together on the body of water. So at the end of the day, it's a very ambitious project, about 100 hectares out on the land. We've got this body of water also, and it's all a very complex site, but it means that we can, on one spot, bring up with everything that industrialists need to offer their wind turbines. And once the wind turbines are out at sea, in coming years, there will be the question of maintaining them and bringing some of them back to change some of their parts. And that will be able to be done in zone number 3, the zone which will have been created for the initial project. So, simple question. All of the industrial activities in Marseille, will they be the same in Port-la-Nouvelle? Are you going to be doing the same thing? Or are you going to cooperate and split the jobs? Split the tasks? Well, your question is a bit of a tricky one. Hervé and I have been talking for a long time. We are rivals, but let's be rivals in an intelligent manner. We want the industry to get up and running. To date, no port has any reason to specialize today. Both ports are going to have their project off our coastlines. And let's take the example of something in Denmark, which is going on, which is a worldwide reference for wind turbines. The Iceberg, the company, didn't specialize immediately. They did the entire value chain at the kickoff when they shifted from petrol and gas, from oil and gas to wind energy. And there's not yet been a question of each different port specializing. I think, for as far as we're concerned, between Marseille and Port-la-Nouvelle, we are saying that yes, today we will be building our infrastructures to do these same activities, but to respond to a bigger market. It's not just the French market, and at the end of the day, it's the whole industry which will decide whether the ports become specialized or not, depending on how the different commercial farms are launched. Yes, so there's going to be a specialization of the wind farms, of the ports, once the market has developed. Well, we've got 3 container terminals. These are terminals which are competing between each other, and they adapt to the market. The market is different whether you're talking about floaters or integration. The floaters can be towed easily over thousands of kilometers. And so we need to think about the entire Mediterranean market when we're building our floaters. And I think we are the only two to be so far down the road in manufacturing floaters. But in the Mediterranean, there aren't that many ports really who can offer such a large spaces of water and land. And here we are talking about a few hundred kilometers. So a port such as Marseille, first that means the French and the Italian coasts, and that gives us visibility on the market, and then we will see whether there is enough room for 2 integration sites here in France, depending on how the market develops. In France, in Italy and Spain. The integration capacity of 1 giga per year is ambitious, but I think we can do that. Let's see what happens. Let's see whether our analysis is apt. 1 giga from when? Oh, from 2026 as far as we're concerned. It's not 1 giga per year, it will be 300 and 500 mega per year as far as we're concerned. Now, you're saying that you're more or less leading in the Mediterranean, but in terms of the world is there any competition coming from any particular part of the world? Not necessarily in the Mediterranean basin, but could you be expecting competition from Korea, China? Could you have some competitor rolling up in the next 6 months? Well, from an industrial point of view, we think that competition will probably come for the floaters. It can come from Asia, but not necessarily. It could be Turkey, North Africa, or Eastern Europe even. That's the kind of competition that we are seeing upstream, or for the floaters. As I was saying, you can tow a floater for thousands of kilometers. I'm quite confident in the concrete technology. We've got all the cards that we need to play to be the leaders. We've got several sites in Fos. We might be a little bit more concerned about steel and the availability of welders and of the raw material, whereas countries such as Turkey could be serious competitors for us and give us a good run for our money. Final question, just to tie up with the following roundtable: is there a limit in terms of size of machines, whether you're talking about your floaters or your wind turbines? Is there a size limit to your wind turbines? Oh, well, we don't really have a clear-cut opinion on that. We are working on technologies for 20-25 megawatts. My constraint is the depth of the water. And at Port Noël, we've got 320 meters. And so I don't imagine that we'll have floaters that go 300 meters down into the sea while I'm still in my job. But I've already mentioned, even last year I think I mentioned this concept of PLN Max. Can you explain that? Yeah, PLN Max, these are the maximum capacity of a floater that could be constructed with available infrastructures at Port La Nouvelle. Yeah, well, I was in Le Havre and I saw that the wind turbines grew in size faster than the administration and the paperwork could keep up with. We have a fictitious wind turbine of 30. And the constraint for infrastructures is not proportional to the size of the wind turbine. It is quite probable that integrating, for the same power, you could have a wind turbine of 20 or 30. The 20s could be more difficult than the ones measuring 30, given you've got more, they're bigger, so you've got bigger wind turbines, but you've got fewer of them. So if you've got these wind turbines of 30, well, that's not problematic. Can we take another question or take a question or two from the audience if there are any questions in the audience? There will be a microphone if you wish to ask a question in French or in English. No, nobody has any questions, so you've all been very clear. Thank you very much indeed. I'll let you go down into the room and we will continue with our next round table. We have a whole new bunch of speakers to come up and join us here. We have Herveline Gaborio, Peter Varna, Jose Ignacio Rafajuan, Izan Lecrom, and Cecilia Girard-Vica. So those are our next panelists. If they'd like to come up to the stage, please. Somebody's missing. Oh, it's Jose, I think he was missing. Everybody's with us. Very good. Okay, so I'm just going to organise my bits and pieces here on the table. Whoops. There we go. Very good. So I am going to go from my right-hand side all the way along the line. So, Izan Lecrom, you are Director of Site Development for the Open Sea Foundation. This is the French test centre. We test marine energies. You've got next to you Herveline Gaborio, who is General Manager of the French Energy Marine Research Institute. Then we've got Gérard Vica. Hang on a second, who have we got here? We've got the Met Centre, representative from the Met Centre. And we've got Peter Varna next to you, who's development manager or senior business developer of the Applied Scientific Research Organization. I'm checking that. Yes, in the Netherlands, it's called the TNO. I'm sure that the interpreter put the words in the right order. Fingers crossed. And we've got José Ignacio Rafa Juan, who is a project engineer for the floating wind research. He's a floating wind research engineer at the Catalonian Institute for Energy Research in Spain. It's called the IREC. So my first question for you, Cecilia, from the Marine Energy Test Center in Norway. So you were a trailblazer in Europe for testing floating machines, and you have seen all kinds of machines float by. My question for you is, first of all, for what's the purpose of having a test center such as yours? Thank you.
In English. All companies developing new concepts for floating offshore wind. When they are finished with the research and the engineering of different concepts, there will always be a point in time where they are ready to build a full-scale prototype or a demonstrator project and install this in a real environment in the sea, and this is where the need for a test site comes in, and it's not only about showing that the technology is functioning, but it's also about showing to the world that this concept is possible to build it, it's possible to install it and operate it as well. So. And we are also facilitating for these test projects and making the companies that develop the technology able to focus on their technology development. And so that is what we do. Yeah.
Merci.
Thank you very much. So how many floaters have reached commercial maturity, in your opinion? How many have you seen in your test center? I think there was a presentation by Madame Giravika, which can be put up on the screen, perhaps?
Yes, so I can say a little bit about how it all started. So the test center was created in just after the deployment of the first floating offshore wind turbine in the world, the Hywind demo, which you see there in 2009. And this is a spar concept, which means that it's a very
Donc c'est une forme de crayon, c'est ça? Le spar.
It's like a crayon. It's in the shape of a crayon. Does it look like a big crayon which is sink in the water?
Also very deep, so 100-meter draft. So it's suitable for Norwegian fjords, but maybe not as much in the Mediterranean ports. And then after a couple of years, the Google X Makani project was installed in our test site. And this is a very disruptive kite technology. It had some successful flights, and then the project was stopped. And after a while, we also had this another spar Danish concept, this Stiesdal offshore technology, installed in 2021. And now the next project that we see is coming is a vertically axed wind turbine. It's a Swedish concept, the Sea Twirl. And we expect this to arrive late next year or maybe 25. And yes.
Est-ce que les concepts
have the concepts changed a lot since they're being tested at your test center and the moment when they were sent into the commercial arena?
Yes, I would say that the Hywind concept is actually now being commercial, reached a commercial maturity level. And after the Hywind demo, a couple of years afterwards, there was the Hywind Scotland project with 5 turbines, and then and now last year we had the start of the Hywind Tampen, which is now the biggest floating offshore wind farm with 11 units.
Et il existe.
So how many floating wind turbine concepts exist?
Different opinions on that. We have done our mapping, and I think that it's 83 that we have arrived to, but there are also other mappings showing that there are more than 100. So there are still a lot of different concepts, and we are now expanding our test site, and we try to have as many different concepts that is possible. And yes, we are very much looking forward to the development and see which concept will further develop.
Est-ce que vous arrivez à...
Can you see the future? Do you know what concepts have the greatest chance of winning out commercially? Are there certain characteristics that they share, for example?
It's the 100 million euro question that everyone is asking, which concept. But we see that there is different concepts that are applicable to different areas and different markets. So that has to be taken into account. And we see also now that the different concepts, they are more linked to the supply chain, to a specific market, and they are also linked more and more to the pipeline of projects that are coming. So yes, it's I don't want to say anything about that. I think that we'll see, and what I can say also is that there is a lot of new disruptive projects emerging that we have seen, especially in Norway, that are questioning the conventional turbine as well. So we are following these developments. Yeah.
Merci.
Thank you very much. We will come back to you with more questions later. I'm now going to hand the floor to Mr. Lecrom, Isam Lecrom of the Open Sea Foundation. So you have test sites in France, and I think Mr. Lecrom also has some slides. Perhaps we can put them up on the screen so we can see what we're talking about. If you're not sure about Open Sea, what is Open Sea? You can speak in English or French, whichever way you like. We've got interpreters here. So Open Sea, let me say a couple of words about Open Sea. It is a newcomer to the French stage. It's a foundation, a not-for-profit foundation that was created in March 2023, and the purpose of the Open Sea Foundation is to speed up the setting up of the floating wind turbine industry in France, make it go through as quickly as possible, helping with all related questions, everything to do with technology. That's our job. And today, Open Sea is relying on. You can take your headset. Take your headset off if it's worrying you. Yes, Open Sea is counting on feedback from all the former managers of the French test sites, in name EDF, Ifremer, École Centrale de Valico, and another one. So I could just say a little bit about Open Sea Foundation now. Well, Open Sea, as you can see, we manage 5 test sites, and we focus on speeding up the industry, so hydroelectrics and all the rest, and the floating wind turbines as well. And you've got a project to build a new wind farm. You're going to be building a new wind farm. And I believe you've got a 6th test site on the drawing board. Can you just give us an update on these projects? Okay. Well, the Open Sea Foundation is funded by the French state for 2 goals in terms of floating wind turbines. The first is to update test sites so that we can test wind turbines from 2 to 6 or 2 to 8 megawatts. That's the first target. The second target is to study the feasibility of setting up in France a very high power test site where we can demonstrate and test future wind turbines of over 10 megawatt. So these are the turbines of the future. So this is what the state is backing. And there's a call for projects which was won by our foundation, and within that call we have actions on SEMREF to bring it up to scratch and up to 10 megawatts so that we can work with several machines. Today there is a Mistral site which is on the Mediterranean, and that has already got authorization since 2014 to host 2 floating wind turbines. That site is funded by the state, and we're starting to build it today, and the target is to launch the first contracts in 2024 to supply equipment and to commission the site by 2025, summer, autumn. So those are the first 2 goals. That's the wind turbines for 2 to 6 or 2 to 8 megawatts, and the feasibility study we've got on the high power side was started recently. There's a working group that was set up to think about designing the market, identifying what the site needs, and then to start working on its layout. So what we can say today is that there is a need for that type of site. That's absolutely obvious to us. In our working group, we all agree that a lot of developers are asking to be able to use this kind of site to take the risk out of their technology. That's to reassure their insurers and their investors. And so we have identified that this kind of infrastructure does not exist right now in Europe, or not to our knowledge anyway. And so we are working on several possible sites to be able to build this infrastructure of the future.
Vous savez où est-ce qu'il va se situer, ce 6e site, du coup?
Pas encore tout à fait, puisque...
Not quite, because at present what the state requested us by that project operated by ADEME is to identify all the possibilities on the French territory. So we are studying along several lines, and there is a coast. We have several solutions, several possibilities. We have identified kind of macro areas where there is no hindrance. At present, those macro areas are unsurprisingly the Atlantic and Mediterranean facade. What are the floating wind turbines that are in your test center at present? In the 5 sites of the Open Sea Foundation. So out of those 5 sites, 3 of them have a capacity to have floating wind turbines. Near Brest, we have small-scale tests, SEMREF and Mistral. On Sainte-Anne-de-Borzic, there was a former project which was called EOLink. It is a platform which you can see now. It's the 3rd picture on top. So it's a floating wind turbine which has been tested on the Borzic area. And you can see WindQuest under that, which has been tested at a small scale. We also have the FlowGen project, which is being tested. And on the SEMREF site, we are preparing the arrival of a prototype, of 5 megawatt prototype called BOULANGER. And it will be in real scale on the same REV site, and it will arrive there by the end of 2024. So these are the wind turbines that we've had on our sites. Have you got other slides? No, but I would like to say a few more words on the upcoming Mistral project. All right, we'll come back to this later, because I would like to give the floor to José Ignacio Rafajuan on the test centers. I think that in Catalonia you will have a test center, is that right?
Our intention. We recently started one of the most ambitious projects we have. And at this moment, we are planning to have a test site for 75 megawatt in Catalonia, working by January 2026. So we have to work a lot on it, and actually we are already working quite hard on this. And our idea is to, more or less for the same reason as other test centers are already there working, we want to see which is the performance of the different prototypes. We want to see which is the impact of this, because, for example, in terms of social acceptance, we have a lot of problems, as you know, in the sector. Not because it is a bad decision installing a wind farm, but because we don't know which are the real consequences of the turbines. So in this case, we are going to have a maximum of 6 turbines working at the same time, but will be large scale, so a maximum of 15 megawatt per turbine. So in this case, we can see how it is going in a very small scale in terms of number, and after this we can mitigate some problems that we can find. We can try to find the solutions to the issues that are present there, and after this, if we check it, if we validate it, we can go further to the commercial scale projects.
Vous avez un horizon de temps?
What's your time scale? What's your time scale? What should be the date? When should it be ready? What date?
Ok.
Already with the prototypes.
Ok. Est-ce qu'il y a une coopération entre vous tous, tests de centre?
Is there some cooperation between all of you in the various European centers, or do you work everyone in your own country? So this question is addressed to everyone around the table. Cecilia, do you want to start? No,
Everyone knows each other pretty well, so we started to discuss together because we're facing the exact same difficulties, and maybe it's an answer for later in the process. But I believe that if we're not playing together, we're gonna fail. We will not keep we will not stay ahead in terms of R&D. So it's not that if we want to play together, but I think we don't have a choice, actually.
Yes, I can respond to that. We are have started now an initiative to cooperate more closely with the different test sites in Europe, and we want to do more cooperation together. And we are already in close contact with the Spanish test sites Plocan and BIMEP, and also now with some trying to get more cooperation. And I think also that there are so many concepts out there now that wants to test, and there is a lack of capacity. So we need to join forces to be able to accelerate the development. Yeah.
Vous voulez ajouter un mot?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, nowadays there are already some existing test sites. We are the last ones in this game, but despite of that, there's a lot of interest of companies to come and try this. So instead of see each other as the competitors, we try to learn to avoid doing the same mistakes that others did, although maybe they were more brave because they started before us. And yeah, there's a lot of things to do, and yeah, we are starting now. We are at the early stage with the permits for our test site, but already contacted some test sites and more to come.
Oui, j'imagine qu'avec 87 designs.
With 87 designs, you have enough work for various test sites in Europe. Pete Werner, I'm going to give you the floor. to talk of the density of windmills. The sea is not a free space. So we'll have your presentation on the screen now. Pete, I would like to ask you this question. What's the density on which you are working in the Netherlands for your wind farms? And what can you reach? What's the highest potential density in terms of what's per square kilometer?
I've heard a lot of interesting remarks on co-use of the sea, and especially the fishermen should have a place there. And with ever larger turbines, we are talking 50 megawatt, I heard people bid 30 megawatts. That also means that the spacing between turbines of, let's say, 4 rotor diameters gets bigger and bigger, which creates space for other use. And I think it's essential. Those people have been out there for centuries, and now we have invented something new, which we call offshore floating wind or offshore wind, and we say, get out of our sea. That's not going to happen. That's not the way forward. So yes, we have to share. What you see on the slide is the overview of the Dutch tenders, which are all bottom fixed. We are in the lucky circumstance, we have sandy bottoms at 40, 50, 60 meters. We do not have any floating in our part of the North Sea. So also no test sites on floating in the North Sea. But the spacing there is typically, I have to look it up, between 5.5 and 9 megawatts per square kilometer. That's quite a bandwidth of spacing, which is dictated by the site. How many shipping lanes, how many cable crossings, how many cables. So there is a bit of opportunism there, how much to spread it. We have done our own calculation as TNO, where we see that for 15 megawatt turbines, which presently are the biggest ones in the market, then the optimal spacing would be, I have to look it up, between 4.7 and 5 megawatts per square kilometer. That means that if you put them denser, you get more wakes and you lose a bit more energy. So that's the bandwidth that we are looking at.
Et alors, comment est-ce qu'on peut limiter ces effets de sillage?
How can you limit the wake effect between the turbines? How can you avoid the turbines to bother one another, so to speak?
You cannot mitigate that 100%, but we are designing rotor blades that are able to work together as a choir and not as single singers. So the blade design is optimized. We use vortex generators, we use turbulators, we use winglets on blades, which is all add-ons on blades to prevent wakes being shaped as big as they are, to reduce them. And also we have a concept which we already have a patent for over 10 years, which is now being finally taken up by the market, which we call active wake control. Then turbines are, against everything that we've been taught over the past decades, not looking directly into the wind, but turning 20, 25 degrees off the wind to bend the wakes from their brothers downstream. So that's what we do to wake. And Siemens is now taking that up. And then overall, especially the loads are reduced a lot. And that's the big upside. And overall, we increase 2-3% of annual energy production.
Alors, vous l'avez dit, il n'y a pas de parc flottant aux Pays-Bas.
As you said, there is no floating windmill wind farm in the Netherlands. Do you work on the floating offshore area? In which area of the floating farms are you working?
We are working closely together with all the developers internationally, and also with the original high wind project. We are looking from a turbine perspective. We understand the aerodynamics, we understand the control, and they have really big effect on the stabilization of the floater. So we have done a lot of research on a high wind project. We have done a lot of research on designing floaters for the high wind 2 for Tampen. We have done a lot of research for floaters on Korea. And yeah, the biggest topic is to build them industrialized. There is, I think, over 100 designs now, and as we speak, a new one is probably coming up. But we need to focus and have dedicated designs for areas, so spark buoys for really deep waters like Norway, maybe semi-subs or TLP for Mediterranean area, and then hopefully we can come to a dominant type there.
Merci beaucoup. On va revenir sur cette question de recherche et de tout ce que vous mettez les uns et les autres en œuvre.
Thank you. So it's very interesting to see all what you are all doing to put in place this pretty new industry. Hervé Gaborio, You work in the French Institute for Marine Energy. What's the role of R&D in the development of that industry? There's many work which is ongoing. What is your role, and what are the projects you're working on in order to structure this industry? Well, I can only echo what's already been said. We have to work on de-risking this industry, especially the floating wind farms. It's a very impressive number of technologies that have been developed and tested, and they are still under testing. So we have to work on de-risking. It has to go through some type of standardization and also new technologies which are currently being developed with new tools, helping us to understand how these innovations can work all together, the interactions between turbines, cables, anchoring lines, and some tools that help us to bring costs down whilst having a competitive industry. Economic challenges must be in the front of our mind. We have to deal with various types of waves, or winds, weathers. We have to take into account environmental and societal dimensions so as to have a proper integration in the environment. So, in France Énergie Marine, we have an institute for energy transition. We focus on sea energy, sea wind turbines. We act as a center of excellence in which we bring together skills from private and public sectors. We work on the major challenges at the local level as well on maritime coastlines, and we want to create jobs on our territories. We have some issues such as technological reliability. We work on anchoring systems and cables. We work in our laboratories, but also in real life at sea to see how our technologies change over time, and we try to develop the most standardized items possible. We also have a project on studying winds at sea and the impact of waves, which we have been able to modelize, and we have tested this in our labs to see how these waves are going to impact the behavior of a floating wind turbine. And is it working? Well, it comes as a surprise to see the difference between the way we take into account these waves in our labs. We've been able to transfer the impact from ground turbines to maritime turbines, and we see the difference, and it's going to change the way the industry is going to develop its products now. So we have to take into account the environment and our societies as well. We have the Nestor project, which aims at developing ecosystemic approaches, taking into account the impact of a wind farm locally and taking into account the impact of various wind farms on an ecosystem, whether it be biology or human activities. We have developed models in order to predict if we have 1 or 2 gigawatts in the Mediterranean, what will be the consequences on the coastline, and this will be taken into account when we decide where to locate our wind farms. Thank you. We will come back to specificities later on, including maintenance. And you will be faced with maintenance challenges as soon as commercial wind farms will be operating. But I'd like to come back to you, Ignacio. No, sorry, José Ignacio Rafa Juan. It's a long name for us French people. So, I would like to ask you this question. What's the status of floating wind farms in Spain? How is it considered? Is there some investment from the government in this industry? And for you specifically at IREC, what are you doing to support the industry?
That's 3 questions. I will try to answer all of them. If I don't do that, please let me know. So what's going on in Spain? Well, we have the technology, we have the knowledge, I think. What we are missing is the wind farms. But we have the engineers, we have been manufacturing the substructures for more than one pilot. We have developers of technology, developers of the substructures itself, so the designers. We have research institutes, not only ourselves, that are working on this, so I think it's going quite a lot in Spain in this regard. Then regarding support, for example, recently this year the government already gave 147 million euros to support test sites, and that's when we entered this game. We received actually 30 million by the government of Spain, and it was not only for the test sites but also for the designers of the prototypes, so they could go. There was the budget was split in different categories. So one part is for the test sites itself, and the other part was for the developers of the technology, so they could manufacture actually these prototypes. And then regarding ourselves, what we do in terms of floating offshore wind to support it, well, many things. We do optimization, for example, of the location of the turbines in the site. We do optimization of the cabling layout and selection of this cable. We do control of the wind farm, not a typical control, maybe something similar to what you said before. Definitely not the same, but similar. For example, integrated control of the complete wind farm instead of all the turbines trying to maximize the output, maybe try to have the same output, but if you control all the turbines at the same time, maybe the fatigue loads are lower. For example, in the front row, that is always receiving the strongest winds, for example. We do analysis, calculations of cost in terms of LCOE, the levelized cost of energy, and analysis of as well LCA, so the life cycle assessment, which is the equivalent CO2 emissions of a wind farm, not only during the manufacturing of the components, but during the whole life. And this is very useful, both the LCOE that I just said and the LCA are very useful to compare this technology against others and see where we are.
Je voulais montrer justement la carte que vous avez élaborée. Est-ce qu'on pourrait avoir...
I wanted to show this map of yours. Can we show the presentation of José Ignacio? You mentioned LCOEs and you published a very impressive map, which I would like to show now. And you're going to comment it yourself. Basically, it shows the cost of wind farms, floating farms in the various places where they are located. But you can say that better than me. What can you see on that map and how did you design it?
This is a work that we did this year, and we wanted to really know. Definitely this is not very accurate, extremely accurate. I mean, we did it with data from the globe, but we wanted to show which is the cost, the LCOE, the levelized cost of energy of floating wind in the globe. So all over the world. So it's quite ambitious, but we did it and we published it. It's in a public website. And so far we have this and some conclusions I will mention later. But what we have here is the globe and the analysis between 60 meters and 1,000 meters of water depth. 60 not because below 60 we can't install floating wind, but it's like the number we are having all of us more or less in mind. That is the limit when bottom fixed turbines are going to be cheaper if we are under 60 meters. So then it makes no sense installing floating wind. Maybe this is slightly being increased nowadays, but more or less that's the idea. And then 1,000 because in the short and medium term we are not going to install wind farms in waters deeper than 1,000 meters. So maybe in the long term we can.
Ça paraît déjà pas mal, 1000 mètres.
It seems quite a lot, 1,000 meters deep. So on that map, the blue is when it's inexpensive and red is when it's expensive, is that right?
Exactly. Good. and that's why this is easy to understand.
Donc on peut montrer
1,000 might be a lot, but we have oil and gas platforms in deeper waters, so the technology is already there, so we are not scared in the sector about talking in the long term about more than 1,000 meters of water depth.
Est-ce que vous avez montré un peu les coûts eux-mêmes
Can you show the costs in blue? What's the cost for the blue areas and cost for the red areas?
Per megawatt hour, that's the lowest value. This data is from 2022, and although I mean this is just last year, well, almost 2 years ago, the prices are going up in the sector. So at this moment, you should take this as a qualitative analysis rather than. Of course, you can see the numbers and there's a scale there to check the colors, but already we can see a direct 10% maybe, or even more depending on the costs. That went up in just a year and a half. And the red is 250 and more. I mean, of course, this is the analysis of the globe, so we have areas maybe with 1,000 euros per megawatt hour, but of course the scale, we are not going to put that there.
Merci beaucoup. Vous aviez fini?
Bien.
Carry on? Okay. Isan Lecrom, je reviens vers vous.
Isan Lecrom, I'm coming back to you. You talked about ISCRAM. Can you say a few words on this, because we have many other things to say on R&D and the various stakes in the industry. Yes, in a few words. We need these test infrastructures. All countries agree on this. We have a lot of demand and very few infrastructures. The Mistral site is under construction, but it's full already. We have 2 projects, a 6 megawatt turbine and a 3 megawatt turbine, which are going to reach our site by 2025 and 2026 with Technique Énergie and Saipem. So I'm just saying this to show that these infrastructures are totally indispensable, but we don't have enough of them. Piet Warner. And this question is for everyone, actually. What are the principal cost reduction potentials for wind mills, floating wind farms? What do you have to focus your attention on?
You are asking a country that does not have floating wind in its own basins.
Mais qui a une grosse industrie qui envahit le monde.
But yeah, I definitely agree with the cost modeling that has been done in Spain, that you see across the globe. And the biggest challenge to come to cost lowering is industrialization. To really come to focus and not make new designs every day that surface anywhere. We really have to focus on what area are you working in, what floater do you need, and then come to industrialization. And that also, I think, that means that you have to concentrate your operation of assembling those floaters in really big ports like Marseille and Paula Nouvelle have demonstrated. You can build sections anywhere across Europe, I would say, to start with the continent to protect ourselves. But then you have to assemble them in cheap areas where there is deep water to build them. Probably one in Norway, maybe in Ireland, maybe in southern France to cover the Mediterranean basin. But you really need to have big hubs where you produce like 100 floaters per year in a systemized manner. If that's not happening, the cost is not going down. And we need to build dedicated floating offshore wind turbines. We have started with the Danes building 3-bladed turbines on a concrete foundations. We have put them on bottom fixed foundations, and now we try to put them on a ship. That's not always going well, so I'm really happy about the Sea Twirl, about 3-bladed vertical axis wind turbines, new designs that are totally dedicated to floating operation, which is a totally different world.
Justement, Cécilia Vica-Girard, le concept que vient de rappeler Pete est nouveau.
The concept that Pete is mentioning is a new one. It's totally new. How can you industrialize a new concept of wind turbines, which is totally new? We have a number of concepts. Siemens, LNGE are well established, to quote only the Europeans.
To start with a new industry and you have to look at the whole supply chain from the construction phase to the installation phase and to the industry into the operational phase and mobilize the supply chain of course it will be challenging to start with a new turbine production, for example, but we have to wait and see how it goes, and we are encouraging all technologies that wants to have a place in this industry, and also this is at the end it will be we think that the competition will be to reduce costs to win this competition, and then to reduce costs in all phases of the supply chain.
Herveline Caborio, comment est-ce que vous voyez les choses? Est-ce qu'il y a un challenge?
Herveline Caborio, how do you see things? Are there new challenges, new technologies that could take the first place?
Pour l'instant, le jeu est
The game is quite open at the time being. Indeed, it's quite open. That's why there are so many tests, so many concepts around. It's very difficult to say. As our colleague has just said, the tendency is towards classic wind turbines which are placed on a floater, but behind that there are a few tricky things. It's not really quite easy to optimize and integrate production, because that floater does have some movement. It shows that it's not that easy, really. So is there a limit to the size of a floating wind turbine? Is there a physical limit to its size? We know limits of yield for PV panels. With the wind turbines, are there any kind of technological limits?
No, I do not dare to say there is a limit. We have theoretically designed a 30-megawatt turbine. I hope it's not going to be built, because it's not good for industry. Shipbuilders also have to put up bottom fixed turbines, which you cannot load out in a port. So they face ships that they originally planned to build for 30 years, that already after 5 years need a really, really big overhauls. That's not good for industry. And in order to limit climate change, we have to build more gigawatts, produce more gigawatt hours, and do that in a decent way. And already we are on par with coal-fired power plants. So bigger means small series, means losing wind turbine companies that do not make a profit. Very small series that we need to build new factories for. I don't think it's very smart to increase.
Donc est-ce que vous pensez qu'il faudrait un standard?
So what do you think we need? A European standard? A European standard level? Would that be the answer?
You have been following the news. Also, the Chinese are now coming into this game, building an 18-megawatt turbine, which is the global champion. I think we would need a global standard, because also the Chinese are building to limit the climate change, and they are the biggest builders of offshore wind in the world. So it's a global standard, and I think also they face installation problems, maintenance problems, change-out problems. So I think we should reach out and also come to a standard there, to a global standard.
Merci.
Thank you very much. There are other challenges. Maintenance is one, Herveline Caborio. So things are still shifting pretty much. So how do you go about it? Do you take the wind turbine back to port to repair it? Well, let's try and keep maintenance interventions to as few as possible by monitoring the machines. There are quite a few systems being developed to make sure that we have a digital twin, which is like a detector, a sensor on the machine. And we do predictive maintenance. That's the best thing. So what kind of solutions might there be if you need to carry out some work on a wind turbine? I think it's best not to bring it back to port, although the jury's still out on that. So acting out at sea is an option, but you'll need boats, special boats, but the boats won't be able to kind of be stabilized. So you've got two moving platforms there. So that means that technology can still innovate. There's a lot of scope for innovation there. And there are new markets coming up for new entrants. And another aspect is to try and identify weather windows, because it can be quite tricky out at sea. I think you've got to decide in function of the weather. And so there are some things which are being developed, i.e. to having really fine-tuned prediction of good weather windows, so that you can go out and kind of change a part in best possible conditions. But there's another aspect, a final aspect, which is a huge challenge. If we do have to work right at the top of a wind turbine, you're going to be very, very high up. It's like being at the top of a mast of a ship, and you're moving around, and we're not sure how the operators there will be able to work up there in such heights, so we can innovate there as well. A comment on maintenance, perhaps, from anyone around this table?
I totally agree. Predictive maintenance is the way forward, and adequate digital twins are really, really vitally important. But ultimately, we will also have to do some big component exchange. We have to exchange blades because of lightning strike. We have to exchange gearboxes. We have to exchange drivetrains. And that's going to be very, very, very complicated. We do not have the dedicated big vessels to do that offshore. And towing to port is not easy. It takes a reverse installation. It takes unplugging of cables. It takes upholding of cables, put in a rental machine. I've heard that idea. It's really, really complicated to do big component exchange. And we need to do research on that.
Vous n'avez pas la solution.
You don't have the solution? You don't have the solution to that?
On paper, there are lots of beautiful solutions, but they're all still on paper and not actually tested.
José Ignacio.
José Ignacio, do you have an opinion on this in terms of the new designs and the way in which the industry is maturing and how technologies can evolve?
Yes, I have an opinion. Of course, it's only an opinion, but I think that at this moment, having a standard would be great, but I would put a deadline on there, because that's the bright side. Then we have the dark side, which is that if we have a standard, then we prevent the technology from advancing. And we are in a very novel technology, and I think that we need to foster the development of the technology. So on the one hand, I think we should already start a lot of wind turbines. We know that at this moment, I mean, if we prove that they work, no problem with the environment, right? But we can already start installing. We can see how it is going. At the beginning, we know the electricity is going to be quite expensive, but we will learn from this. I mean, for example, if we change the design of the floater, maybe the mooring system will be similar to another one that was designed 5 years ago, but you have been testing that for 5 years. So you can have that knowledge and use it later for the next generation. So in this regard, I think, yeah, we have to be fighting in both sides a bit and see how it goes. And then in terms of, for example, O&M, there are already some technologies being improved, like these spider cranes or self-hoisting cranes, for example, that try to use smaller vessels, because as we are going bigger and bigger, then these vessels, the cost of these vessels is not proportional. So sometimes having 2 vessels or one that is twice that price, this one is going to be maybe 4 times more expensive. So if we can split a bit the job, then we have a bigger market of vessels to use them, and this is bringing down again the O&M costs, for example.
Merci.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions for you, but perhaps I should open up to the room if there are any questions in the room. We've gone over a lot. The R&D was touched upon. Oh yes, we'll bring a microphone to the gentleman who'd like to ask a question. Here comes the microphone. The technician is bringing it right now.
Allô?
Oui.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Merci. C'est une question qui concerne
This is a question for testing. I think any panel member can answer this question about testing. And what about the performance levels of these machines? To what extent the climate environment, i.e. the weather, I'm thinking of Norway in particular, is relevant to machines that will be placed elsewhere in the world, for example, in the Mediterranean? And is there any kind of test compatibility between... Well, in other words, I think weather conditions in the North Sea are nothing like what we'll find in the Mediterranean. Thank you. Thank you for that question. Cecilia, would you like to go for this one?
Yes, I can answer that. With our concession from the government, we got some requirements to do a lot of research and also find out how the turbine is affecting biodiversity and also birds especially. So we have projects, for example, that are mapping the bird activity around the wind park, and we have to report on this to the government. This will be related to the specific biodiversity that is existing in Norway. So I mean. That would be a more specific question, I guess, for someone that is within marine biology or to answer if this
Sur la biologie marine, on peut comprendre.
Yeah, indeed, for marine biology, okay. But what about the principle about the stability of the floaters, for example, in the North Sea? Is that the same as in the Mediterranean? If you've got a high wind floater, does it...
Then it's a different story. Then it's the technology, the functionality of the technology related to the mid-ocean data. I mean, in our test site, we have quite high winds and high waves and not so much tide. So this is appropriate to the North Sea conditions, and there will be other conditions in the Mediterranean Sea and other markets also. So,
Juste une petite question pour vous laisser répondre, mais complémentaire.
Just another question. If you test a machine in Norway, will it then be set up in France or Spain? Well, machines which are tested on site, well, of course, there are digital models as well. So we can use a model that represents the conditions at different sites, i.e. in the Mediterranean or in Norway, and we can reproduce them, and we will identify then how the machine will act or will react in a different environment. But depending on the technology, the turbines aren't going to react in the same way. But these are digital models, and they're very important. There are a lot of standards that have been developed in the industry so that we can all agree that this particular model is very representative of the site conditions. Juan Ignacio, ensuite Pete, and then Pete.
Just in this regard, I would say 2 things. First of all is, if you have a prototype in a test site in Norway with that waves, probably you can use that directly in the Mediterranean. So at least you are proving like the most, well, at least a case which is conservative. Of course, you would never install a prototype that withstand that waves in the Mediterranean because you are paying more. And we are always talking about this, for example, 83 prototypes, but then you tailor that for each site. So for example, the same design, the same concept used in the Mediterranean or used in the Atlantic, maybe it's the same concept, but the designs will be completely different. Maybe one is weighting 20% more. And the second thought here is that, well, that's also one of the reasons why we are not competitors, because each of us with a test site have different conditions, not only from the climate, but also on the birds, for example. They're not the same birds in Norway compared to the birds in the north of Catalonia, for example. So you can analyze different aspects there. And this is enriching, and that's why multiple test sites here, I think, is a good decision.
Pete, vous vouliez compléter?
Pete, would you like to add anything?
I would like to make a split between the wind turbine and the floater. The floater is very much dependent on local site conditions, but the wind turbine testing is very well regulated. So it's based in wind turbine, its wind speed classes, its air density, its air humidity, air salinity. All those parameters of testing a wind turbine are very well regulated. So you can test the turbine in various sites across the world and still compare it to each other. But for the floater, that's all the reasons that we have just been heard from my colleagues.
Alors, en guise de...
So, to wrap up, I'm going to give everyone the mic, and I'd like to answer very briefly to this question. So, Europe, what are the conditions for Europe to build an offshore floating wind industry that is competitive and that will resist to competition from other parts of the world? Well, this is something I've already said. I believe we all need to work together. The partners, the countries need to work together, particularly for R&D. We need to unite our forces to rise to joint challenges. So that's my first point. The second is to say that we have to continue to invest and to believe in what is coming out from the research bodies. Today, we all take advantage of what's going on in these different research infrastructures, often indirectly, but that is what is going to generate jobs, come up with new solutions, and make sure that the big players move in and offer new innovative solutions. Evelyn? I'd say that R&D is here to help industry to validate new technologies and develop new technologies and help competition, help everyone to be competitive, to protect the environment, but that's not all. We know that today it is difficult. The industry is having difficult in terms of their buyback tariffs, and I think Europe can help the industry there. Cecilia?
The main issue to be competitive will be to bring the cost down and to be and to make the supply chain together in cooperation with all countries in Europe work effectively.
Merci. Pete?
Pete?
As said, I think large-scale industrialization, but also a sound supply chain which makes profits across the full line. Then we can invest, we can innovate, and we can come to cost reductions and roll it out widely across the globe.
Merci. Et pour finir...
And to the final word, Juan. Or Jose. I'm sorry, I keep getting your name wrong, Jose. Apologies.
No worries. My name is just Jose, and easy. Yeah, well, what I would say in this regard is, for example, collaboration between different countries. For example, between Occitanie and Catalonia, we are in the same area with the wind. So we are not going to install 7 gigawatts. We have no space. We have such a good resource. And then in this regard, not all the tenders are going to be at the same time. So for example, we can have one port in Catalonia that is going to help during the manufacturing of a wind farm in France, and then at the same time the ports of the south of France can help us during the installation, manufacturing, transport and installation of the platforms in a tender that can happen in Catalonia. So this is something that this collaboration would help. And another thing, of course, is regulation. We are always with these long terms. You need 7 years just to have maybe one permit. You can't advance in this at this speed. And I think that if we can define the rules, and if you are a big country or your country just has a very small area where you can install, then maybe from Europe they can develop some regulation to some guidelines, because otherwise maybe it is a very good area but it is small and that country is not going to work on that because it's just one area. And if you put it easy for them, then maybe they can do that quicker.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everybody, and I would like to ask the audience to give you a round of applause. Thank you very much for all of the interesting things you've said, and we will monitor how the industry evolves, and we hope it will grow and grow and will be supported by our states. And we hope that we will be seeing these commercial firms off our coast very, very soon. Thank you very much.